Jan's one of the members that I've known probably longer than most. Some of you have your children here at these meetings. I know Cassie has seen her kids running around. In fact, the family atmosphere we experience at many economic botany and ethnobiology meetings is part of what has drawn us back year after year. Jan raised her children in these meetings, as well as in her various field locations. Jan and I have children that happen to be about the same ages, so they spent some time together at meetings. One year, the SEB met in London, and Valerie and I had our two kids there, and Jan had hers. And one morning, Edelmira Linieres offered to take our children on a tour of the city. The children returned with lots of fun reports about what they had seen around town, and everyone had a great time. We all have good memories of these sorts of meetings, and one of the things I don't think we do enough of is talk with each other about these remembrances. You know, we're a society that studies traditional cultures, and wow, storytelling is a rich piece of that, and we don't do enough of that with each other. So I want to encourage you, since we're having this at the beginning of the meeting, here's your reminder. Sit down with somebody that you haven't talked to in a while and remind them of a story of something that happened in the past, and let's participate in that rich cultural tradition. Jan's early research was in Southeast Asia, working on crop evolution and ecology. Many of her projects have since been conducted in Latin America, in particular studies of cassava germplasm, diversity, and conservation. Recently, she's been a leader in our community in the study of impacts of climate change on human cultures and cultural perspective and responses to climate change. So really the cutting edge stuff that our globe needs. Jan has emphasized the importance of using quantitative data to test strong hypotheses through ethno-ecological experiments. She has effectively blended ecological perspectives of different scales with ethnographic methods for learning and understanding human experiences within ecological systems. Her publications are her first gift to us. Jan has pushed the U.S. National Science Foundation, probably more than anybody, to support ethnobiology research, organizing several successful meetings to address theory and practice of ethnobotany. Many of you in this audience have benefited from the results of these activities. This selfless work has not resulted in a new directorate for ethnobiology research, although hope, is there. But it has kept our projects on the table during periods of contracting budgets, and it's possible for us to walk in and talk with the program officer and discuss ethnobiology, usually without having to explain what it is. This is because of Jan. As chair of the Committee on Science and Traditional Knowledge of the International Union of Biological Sciences, she has been a critical champion of the importance of traditional knowledge in addressing conservation of biological diversity around the globe. Wording from draft documents presented by Jan in IUBS, UNESCO, and other international groups has made its way into various national and international agreements and statements. Thank you, Jan, for carrying the banner for all of us. For more than 15 years, Jan has organized annual meetings of a wide range of scholars to work on recommendations and protocols for curating biocultural collections. This year, the result has been publication of a new book with clear recommendations for working with a wide range of collections. This work is foundational for our discipline, providing reproducible and comparable measures for dealing with collections that do not fit into traditional biological museum curation efforts. Now, many people here are students, and Jan was a student member of SED and has been a leader, including president of this society. She should be a great role model for all of you, especially students, and especially those of you who are with us for the first time. There's no reason you couldn't be standing up here at some point in the future. These words are just a glimpse of the critical role that Jan Salick has played in our discipline, and she is truly deserving of this award of the 2014 Distinguished Academic Botanist.
meeting when our kids, in the evening, we were having in the Natural History Museum, we had we were drinking in the main hall or something. And one of the curators there took our kids and flashlights, gave them each flashlights, and they took them through the whole museum in the dark. And this was before that meeting, that movie, what was it, something about museum in the dark. Yeah, and so, and to look at these huge dinosaurs with flashlights. My kids, anyway, they think botanical gardens is what the world is made of. I really apologize. This is the worst year for me to give this address, and I really apologize. I've explained this to almost everybody here, but I'll say it one more time in case I miss somebody. But I have recently got a concussion in Peru. I got caught in an avalanche, and I got a rock in the back of the head, and I sometimes lose my train of thought. So I've written out this talk. The good news is it's short, so it won't go on forever. But I do, I just to make sure that I don't get in the middle of it. And if I do just sort of space out in the middle, just call my name, I usually respond. But anyway, I wanted to talk about, when I look back at the 40 years that I've been an ethnobotanist, when I look back over the time, what just strikes me as so incredibly unbelievable is how our thoughts, how our paradigms, how our ways of thinking about ethnobotany have changed in that time. We didn't question, some sort of vague, idea that somebody had back then, and since then we have questioned absolutely everything and overthrown most of it, and so I'd like to take the opportunity to talk about paradigms lost and gained, and with a sub-message of don't trust anyone, especially yourself. And that's the hardest thing for me, is to try to figure out how I can trick myself into recognizing the truth. I'm very dense sometimes. So the last 40 years has been an extremely exciting time to be an ethnobotanist. That's not to say that it hasn't always been. Look at Hippocrates and Marco Polo and Linnaeus, especially Linnaeus in his nice little costume there, and Joseph Rock and Schultes, to name but a few of our historical confederates. But in the last 40 years, we have overturned so many paradigms, and I still find it hard to disabuse people of idées fixes, of things like virgin jungles and balance of nature, and agriculture impoverishes tropical soils, and so on. They're just stuck in our mentality sometimes. It is vital that theories are questioned, especially those we hold most dear. Always be on the lookout for what you're not looking for, and that's, that's hard to do, right? Always question your assumptions. Always nurture the exceptions in your data. And the unexpected. When you find something you weren't expecting, look at it carefully and ask yourself, what's going on here? And don't be deterred by rejection, personal rebuff, or derision. I will give you lots of examples of that from my own career, including NSF. I said I just went to NSF, and for the first time visiting program directors in NSF, they were really enthusiastic, and they listened to me, and they liked the ideas, and I was like, what happened? Did I change my deodorant? I couldn't figure out, because this derision was a common topic for a long time. Science is a mean game, but it's really fun, it's challenging, and it's incredibly fulfilling. So those are the messages that I want to get across tonight, and the rest of it is just a bunch of personal anecdotes. And there's also a doo-wop chorus. I I was tempted to put my friends up in these two balconies on the side, and so every time I raised my hand, they'd go, data, 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 because that's my do-up chorus. And that is, that has been the foundation of my career and what I force on my students and encourage in the rest of you. So as Will said, I started as an ethnobotanist, although I didn't really know it at the time because I didn't know what ethnobotany was, in Malaya as a forest research officer surveying virgin jungle reserves with an amazing crew of orang asli tree climbers. And it took me a long time to realize, A, that there were no virgin jungles, and B, that the orang asli were not tree climbers. And the reason for this is that the trees were really, really big. And so the crew, in fact, did have to climb the trees so that we could make specimens. And they would bring down fruit that we could eat. So we ate fruit and marveled at the untouched forest. And then we'd take our, what's called called a parang, it's a machete, and we'd dig a little hole and put seeds into that hole. How tiny, I thought. Later, Daryl Posey made me feel like a blind idiot. Of course, we were planting the virgin jungle, as had been planted for thousands of years. Participant observation only works if you can see. And it's surprising how often you can't see, especially me, but I presume others are like me. And of course, also, those orang asli were much better botanists, much better ethnobotanists than all of us in this room put together. They knew each individual tree by name, by sex, by taste, by sound, by smell, by feel. They were not just tree climbers. It's like Linnaeus, I think, well, we all have heard the stories about Linnaeus learning binomial nomenclature from the Lapps. So the rest of us have done the same thing, only try to own up to it, whereas Linnaeus didn't quite do that. But anyway, years later, I was still trying to convince people that tropical rainforests regenerate, both from seed and sprout. Actually, a partially disturbed rainforest is more diverse. One of our prominent ethnobotanists, I will withhold the name, rejected my findings, changed my results, and never showed me the page proofs. Primary rainforests must be more diverse by all paradigms at that time. So I was put in a position of publishing another paper refuting myself. But even ecology made me take out the explanation that this was Connell's intermediate disturbance hypothesis in action. That was the one, Connell was the guy that, he did experiments on starfish and stuff in tide pools in the northwest, and he found out that if you mess up the tide pools once in a while, that they're actually more diverse than if you just let them sit still. And it seemed like that's what was happening in the tropical rainforests too. I was told in no uncertain terms that I did not understand the theory that Connell had put forth. Later, when I was at Oxford, I met Connell, and I talked to Connell about this. I put it to him, and he said, unless he did not understand his own theory, that my data most certainly did support his hypothesis, and he was delighted to have an example of plants from the tropical rainforest. So my message to you is be tough and believe your data. Data, data, data. Okay, more paradigms. Agriculture impoverishes soils. Jane Mount Pleasant, are you listening? We were talking about this earlier today. Not so when indigenous agriculture is practiced properly. I found healthy tropical soils with intercropping, rapid rotations, managed fallows just long enough to dampen the weeds. Even yearly monocultures flourish on seasonally flooded riverbanks, Varzea for those of you who are familiar, because they receive yearly silt inputs and the pests and diseases are scoured. Still, I hear at meeting after meeting that tropical soils cannot maintain agriculture. Not Western agriculture, true, but then even prairie soils are progressively deteriorating under Western agriculture, so that's not. Anyway, look at your day-to-day data and gather data to prove some of these basic assumptions don't hold water. Another one, intercropping reduces pests and diseases. Yes, it usually does. Because most of our pests and diseases have developed under monocultures. However, with my luck, I studied a pest, the cassava lacebug, that increased under intercropping. Try to get that paper published. Cassava lacebug is native to the Amazon basin where most crops are intercropped, and cassava lacebug had adapted to intercropping. Pests will adapt to whatever the cropping conditions are that are prominent. I was very proud. Mind you, it took me 3 years of the same results to convince myself, but I was very proud not to doubt my data. But honestly, I wanted the results to prove the opposite. Reality, though, is more interesting. So be careful of what you expect from your data. Be careful of what you want. Believe in controls and randomization. Trick yourself into finding what you do not expect. Look for what you are not looking for and go after it when you find it, even if it's hard to publish. And remember, data, data, data. Domestication is so often conceptualized in the same manner. Slow selection for certain traits such as seed size, non-shattering, smaller stature, so on. We're going to have a session on this later in these meetings. When I did controlled studies of Cocona, Solanum sessiliflorum, I found none of this. I found selection for modes of reproduction and for simple heritability. And different traits had different processes in domestication. This is a quantitative geneticist's field day, but not so much for agronomists, maybe not even ethnobotanists, who still see domestication in very simple terms. Indigenous people select Cocona for the lack of spines and the diversity of fruit size, as you see in fruit size, shape, and color, as you can see in the photograph. In the process, they unconsciously select for direct modes of inheritance of these traits. Spines are a single gene dominant, which is easy to select against. Fruit size and shape have become maternally inherited, presumably moving the genes onto the mitochondrial DNA, so that people can reproduce exactly what they want. This is easy to select for. This is not domestication as we learn it in the textbooks, but it is much more interesting. Look for what you are not looking for. Again, I was told repeatedly that I did not understand maternal inheritance. Finally, some of the earliest people who did the earliest publications on maternal inheritance read my paper and said, it's a little boring, but it's good. tough business we're in, but data pulls you through. Probably my favorite paradigm lost over the last 40 years is the balance of nature. Nature is not balanced. It never has been. It is ever changing. We've known this for years, since Darwin and Lyell and before. Change happens at all scales, evolutionary scales, ecological, global scales. Change is our paradigm regained. Believe in it. The idea of balance of nature has been a dominant part of Western philosophy since the Greeks, and it persists in the public imagination and even some ecologists, not to say ethnobotanists today. To me, the interesting thing is, why is it so difficult to disabuse ourselves of this idea? The siren's call of certain concepts that blatantly fly in the face of reality and our senses is fascinating. I don't have an answer to that one. But for ethnobiologists, change is particularly critical since people are the very essence of change. So once again, data. Gather it, savor it, return to it. Who is in my way of divesting philosophical baggage? I am. Freeing myself from preconceived ideas like intercropping is not easy. Looking at the world or at my data with fresh eyes is challenging, but fun and rewarding, even though it may be hard to publish. There are some tricks regarding data. One trick is to look neither at means nor at trends, but to look at variation. In analyzing Amazonian indigenous agriculture, I noticed that the greatest contributors to variation were single women, a largely invisible population. In climate change, warming is not as important sometimes as weirding. The extraordinary and often unpredictable variation we are seeing in weather. Another way to trick yourself or to test yourself are longitudinal studies over time, which test our assumptions. In studying cassava diversity, which is of course huge in the upper Amazon, I had thought that I would find that it was decreasing over time and that agrobiodiversity was being lost. But lo and behold, the overwhelming change in cassava biodiversity was turnover. The tremendous diversity of cassava varieties was replaced by similar numbers and diversity of different cassava varieties. The agrobiodiversity had changed little, but the germplasm of this clonally propagated crop had almost completely been replaced. Presumably, the red queen of cassava varieties had to run faster and faster to keep up with the ever-evolving pests and diseases. Clones are evolutionarily stagnant and prone to being overwhelmed by their enemies, so people change clones regularly and rapidly. And I never would have found this. Nobody else has ever found this. And only because data. I couldn't argue with my data. Another trick is to push the envelope. Always push the envelope. To divest old paradigms, don't try to pigeonhole concepts, especially the concept of ethnobotany itself. Push the envelope, redefine it. Include what you are good at, include what you like to do. It should be fun. Do it, use it, explore it, but don't define When the National Science Foundation insisted that we define ethnobiology before they were willing to fund it, we begrudgingly came up with the least restrictive, most dynamic concept we could. Quote, ethnobiology is the scientific study of dynamic relationships among people, biota, and environment. Even now I worry that we've left something out or made someone uncomfortable. A counterexample to this approach is the hegemony of economics. Everybody loves to bitch about economics, so I will too. Economists don't seem to care what they leave out or who is uncomfortable. The Earth Summit in Rio 1992 featured indigenous people and conservation, while Rio 2012 was threatened to be overrun by green economics. Over biodiversity, over climate change, not to even mention indigenous rights or knowledge. Fortunately, there were people, young people, I might add, at that meeting who were pushing the envelope again and rejecting the greed economy. And that brings me to another paradigm I wish we could lose, and that is dominion over the earth. A fourth technique for liberating ourselves is to test our preconceptions, is to force ourselves outside of our comfort zone. And this is really just a personal example because some of you would be very comfortable in this example that I'm giving. But personally, a paradigm regained for me is that of cosmology and its role in ethnobotany. In my work, I have come to appreciate that nearly all indigenous perceptions of climate change have a strong cosmological basis. Imbued in Western science, I see climate change as mechanistic, but for most cultures, this is not so, even when they understand the mechanisms of climate change very clearly. Spiritual associations are central to appreciating and often mitigating people's relationship to climate change and to other plant and environmental associations. And even though I was pushing myself outside of my comfort zone in doing this study, I still did this study with a plethora of data to force myself. Now, our new shiny paradigm that we like the best is biocultural diversity, an integrated, interacting whole. And we have much to develop and to test with this paradigm. Don't let it sit as some sort of generalization. We need all our creativity and ingenuity to see this shiny new idea with unfettered eyes and thoughts. Let us not assume, but let us measure, test, question, investigate with abandon all over the world from multicultural perspectives. Why, where, when, how, who, and when not. And gather data. It has been a privilege to be a scientific foot soldier in these botanical, environmental, intellectual, and spiritual revolutions. I look back in awe and forward with the most profound gratitude that the young people in this room will carry our field and our society forward through more upheaval and alteration. Thank you. I loved what Bob Bai said about those young people with sparks coming out of their forehead. And I was like, that's what we need. Thank you for your will, your commitment, and for carrying on the astounding way that is ethnobotany. And remember, data. Thank you.